Hey, welcome back to the 12 mystical actions in the Holy Mass according to Thomas Aquinas. We've got several more to go, so let's jump right in. The third mystical act that Thomas covers is all the signs of the cross used in the Mass. Now remember, Thomas is living in the 1200s. He is celebrating the Latin Mass, what is closest to what we know as the extraordinary form. And there are many more signs of the cross in the extraordinary form than there are in the ordinary form. So we're going to walk through all those signs of the cross and look at how Thomas gives them meaning. And actually, Thomas isn't coming up with this himself. There's a whole school, a whole tradition of looking for the mystical significance for each of these acts. So the first is a set of 3 signs of the cross at the beginning of the Roman canon. And Thomas says that these 3 signs of the cross represent the work of God, the work of Judas, and the work of the Jews in the condemnation of Christ, beginning at the betrayal and then the Last Supper, through the Passion and then the death. The second one was that there was a selling of Christ, and that he was sold to the priest, to the scribes, and to the Pharisees. So again, we have these 3 signs of the cross. Again, there were signs of the cross to foreshadow the Passion at the Last Supper. And to note this, 2 crosses were made, one in consecrating the body and one in consecrating the blood. Fourthly, there was Christ's passion itself. And so in order to represent this, there were 5 wounds. And in the fourth place, there is a 5 signing of the cross at his words, a pure victim, a holy victim, a spotless victim, the holy bread of eternal life, and the cup of everlasting salvation. So at that moment, those 5 represent the 5 wounds in each hand, in the feet, and in the side. Fifth is signified the outstretching of Christ's body, the shedding of blood, and the fruits of the Passion. And again, we have a triple signing at this point of the Mass, where it reads, "As many as shall receive the body and blood and be filled with every blessing." 6, there's Christ's threefold prayer upon the cross, where he says, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit." And at this point, when the priest says, "Thou dost sanctify, quicken, and bless," according to Thomas, that's what's signified there. 7th, Christ hung on the cross for 3 hours. And so there are 3 signs of the cross to designate those 3 hours, and that's at the through him, with him, and in him. That's coming to the very end of his passion, of his suffering on the cross. 8th, there's the separation of his body and his soul, and that is signified by 2 crosses made over the chalice. In the extraordinary form, if you're serving at Mass or if you're off to the side, you can see that. And then 9th, last of all, Christ rose on the 3rd day, and therefore the priest makes 3 signs of the crosses over the chalice before he drops the particle in. The piece of the body, the host, meeting the precious blood, signifies Christ resurrecting. His body and blood come back together. He is back alive. And so there's 3 days, and then the resurrection happens. So those are the meanings of all the signs of the cross. Obviously, Thomas and that medieval mystical tradition is very interested on why all of these repeated signs of the cross are there, and they have a theological answer for each one. Now, the next mystical act in the Mass that Thomas is interested in are all of the hand gestures. So, and he points out 3. First, that the priest brings his hands apart. And he says the priest doing this symbolizes Christ being outstretched on the cross, crucified. The priest brings his hands together. This symbolizes the humility of Christ and also the humility of the priest in celebrating. And then he also focuses in on a practice that you don't see too often anymore, but it is very beautiful, and that is after the consecration, the priest keeps his fingers together like this because these 2 fingers have touched the host. And Thomas says the reason for that is there might be a small crumb or particle that has come off the host, and by keeping his fingers like this, it prevents them from falling on the ground where maybe an altar boy or he may step on it. So in order to protect any possible small fragments, those two fingers are kept together. And sometimes if you go to the extraordinary form, you'll see it always. Sometimes in the ordinary form, in the Novus Ordo, you will see priests keeping that ancient custom described by Thomas Aquinas. Now, the sixth mystical act is turning around to the people. Now, this happens in the extraordinary form 5 times. And Thomas says the reason it happens 5 times is because in the Gospels, Christ appears 5 times on the day of the resurrection. On Easter Sunday, he appears 5 times. And so the priest, and remember in the extraordinary form, the priest is facing, as they say, ad deum, ad orientem, with his back towards the people, and he turns around to greet them 5 times. And so that signifies the 5 times that Christ appears to the apostles and others on Easter Sunday. The 7th is the breaking of the host. As you know, in Mass, the priest breaks the host, and Thomas says that breaking the host symbolizes 3 things. Number 1, that Christ's body was broken in the Passion. Secondly, the distinction of the mystical body. So there are many different states, many different parts in the church. There are the blessed in heaven, there are those in purgatory, those on earth, and then on earth, many different states, lay, religious, priests, popes. And then thirdly, the breaking of the host signifies the distribution of the many graces of Christ to the world and to the church. Now, the 8th is the symbolism of breaking the host into 3 pieces. So you'll see that the priest, he breaks it in half, and then he breaks off a small fragment, and that fragment goes into the chalice after he makes the 3 signs of the cross. Now, there's an ancient rhyme that Thomas cites here, and it doesn't translate so well into English from the Latin, but it goes like this. The host being rent, what is dipped means the blessed, what is dry means the living, what is kept those at rest. And what Thomas says here is those 3 pieces, the part that's placed into the chalice represents all those who have gone to heaven, the church triumphant. The piece that's dry, that's left, is all of those still on earth, the church militant. And then that which is reserved or kept, and this practice was falling out of place in the 12th century. I don't believe it's kept anymore today. But the part that would be reserved for later symbolizes those at rest, those who are in purgatory, the deceased. Now, the 9th objection, or the 9th mystical act that Thomas is interested in, is that dropping of the particle, that smaller piece, into the chalice. And there's 2 reasons for this. The first, the Passion itself, which is represented in this sacrament, and according to this, by the part put into the chalice are denoted those who are still sharers of Christ's sufferings. Secondly, the enjoyment of the blessed can be signified, which is likely foreshadowed in this sacrament, and therefore those whose body are already in beatitude are denoted by the part put into the chalice, which he covered in the previous point. And then secondly, he says that piece should never be given to the faithful because Christ at the Last Supper dipped a morsel into the chalice and gave it to Judas, and so it would be wrong for the priest to give any of the faithful that particle because it would symbolize that they are traitors of Christ. And then the 10th is that the priest should drink wine after he has received communion. You know, the priest, after he's received communion, everyone's received communion, he pours wine and water into the chalice and over his fingers. It's called the ablutions. And then he drinks the ablutions and washes it down. Here, Thomas is concerned that people might think, well, he just received the body and blood of Christ. Why would he just then drink water and wine? And Thomas says that it's for the dignity of the sacrament that it would all be washed down and brought into the priest's system, I suppose, so that if he stuttered or spit, nothing would come out. And then the 11th is the reserving of hosts in the tabernacle. Some might find that strange. And he says, although there was a concern in the early church not to do that, that was because of persecution. But the reason that the Eucharist is reserved is chiefly on account of the sick. Those who cannot attend Mass, and for especially those who are dying, need access to the Blessed Sacrament, to the Eucharist, And therefore, priests can go to the tabernacle where it's reserved, acquire a host, and give it to those who are sick, or especially to those who are dying. And then the last mystical act is the act of a private mass, where a priest would be saying a mass and there would be no congregation. And Thomas says in this scenario there should at least be one server, and that server says the responses, and that server represents the entire Catholic Church. So I hope that's interesting to you, and I hope it's helpful, especially as you attend Mass, as you see the gestures, as you see the symbolism, the way the priest turns around. Of course, in the Novus Ordo, some of these things are not there. But if you ever do attend an extraordinary form Mass, you'll see all of these symbols, and it may just look like a bunch of, mumbo-jumbo or magic. Not the case. Every single detail has theological significance. Well, hey, thanks for watching. Again, God bless.